Welcome back, everybody. We are working our way through APUSH Period 1 curriculum, and we are up now to topic 1.5, which is titled Labor, Slavery, and Caste in the Spanish Colonial System. Let's get into the topic. So we're going to have two actual guiding questions in this brief section. The first, we're going to ask ourselves, what were the causes and effects of the encomienda system? Causes and effects. So let's first figure out what the encomienda system was. An encomienda comes from a Spanish verb which means to entrust, like I'm going to entrust you with something. And what that's referring to is Spanish settlers and conquistadors, as they came over to the New World, they were entrusted with an extensive piece of land. So they'll give you a big chunk of land, and the Native Americans on that land basically come with the land. You are entrusted with this land and the Native Americans. You can demand labor from the Native Americans on this land. You can demand tribute from the Native Americans on this land. You are encouraged to and expected to Christianize the Native Americans as well. Now, this is not technically, on a very technical note, slavery, because it was, again, you're entrusted to treat the Native Americans well as you demand labor from them. But remember, the Spanish are months away by sea across the Atlantic Ocean. They can't exactly monitor what's going on in every one of these plantations, and so in some cases, this turns into basically a form of slavery, as evidenced by the picture on the right. So what was Native American labor used for? Well, all kinds of things. Construction of buildings, digging of irrigation canals, of carrying heavy objects, just being beasts of burden, basically, to growing sugar cane and other cash crops, to working in the mines and finding all that gold and silver we looked at in the last video. So that's the encomienda system in a quick little note. So again, what were the causes and effects? Well, a cause would be the arrival of the Spanish in the New World and the need for labor to extract as much wealth out of these new territories as possible. And the effects would be the required labor and brutal labor in many cases of the Native Americans in North and South America. Our second guiding question we're going to look at is also going to involve labor, and the question is, what were the causes and effects of the African slavery in Spanish North America? So some causes. What would have caused African slaves to be used in the New World? Well, the Spanish quickly found out that they had to supplement their labor force in North America, and I think you can probably understand why. The Native Americans were incredibly susceptible to European diseases, so they're dying in incredible numbers. They're also running away. They don't want to be required to work, and so the Spanish find themselves needing a labor source, and the Africans were less susceptible to European diseases. They've been exposed to them in the past. They're often knowledgeable of the cash crops involved anyways, and so from the Spanish perspective, this seemed to be a way to continue the prosperity of their North American colonies. Now, some effects. How do the slaves get from Africa to the Americas? Well, the Europeans would arrive in West Africa, and there they would bring with them goods. It could be muskets, it could be other trinkets that the Africans just didn't have the technology to manufacture for themselves, and the African leaders in West Africa would trade people that they had captured, often in intertribal warfare, as slaves to get their hands on those European goods. The Europeans would give the goods to the Africans. Africans then would sell fellow Africans into slavery. Europeans then would take them across the ocean to mines and plantations from north all the way down to South America. And we're going to look a lot more extensively at slavery later. This is just kind of a quick preview of it. But the labor being done is just like it was for the Native Americans. It was brutal. It was exhausting. It was particularly deadly. And in some of these Spanish colonies, not only were the Native Americans dying in rapid fashion, so would a lot of African slaves. They would be overworked or malnourished, or diseases would sweep through their communities. And the only way these colonies could continue to function is by the fresh importation of more slaves from Africa. And I think that really speaks to the profitability of this system, because if they can see these workers as largely disposable and they can always buy more from Africa, that tells you the Europeans are making a lot of money off of the labor of these workers. So that was our very quick look at some of the causes and effects of African slavery in Spanish North America. Again, we're going to look at slavery in a lot more detail later. We have one more guiding question to cover in this topic, and this one is all about the caste system. So what role did the caste system play in Spanish colonies? Now, if you're not familiar with the term caste system, it simply refers to a social hierarchy, that there are people at the top who have power. They tend to be few in number, and then there are people at the bottom who don't have a lot of power, and there tends to be a lot of them. And this is a kind of a graphic example of that Spanish caste system, and we're going to go through each one of these pieces so you'll better understand who was in which group. So we're going to begin with a group called the Peninsulares. The Peninsulares would have been Spanish citizens who were born in Spain. Now, why Peninsulares? Why that interesting name? Well, Spain lies on something called the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, so they came from that peninsula. Again, these are 100% Spanish people. They were born in Spain. They moved then to the North American colonies. The next rung down the ladder would be the Creoles. Now, the Creoles, like the Peninsulares, are 100% Spanish. Okay, they're pure Spanish blood. The difference is they're born in the New World. So because of that, because they didn't actually come from the mother country, they have slightly less political power and business opportunities. Now, they're still doing well, most Creoles, of course, but the top rung of the ladder is forbidden to them simply because of where they were born. The next group down the rung of the ladder would be the Mestizos, and the Mestizos are the result of Europeans arriving and intermarrying with Native Americans. A lot of European settlers were young single men, and there weren't a lot of young single Spanish women in the colonies, especially in those early days. And so the Native Americans were really the only option for these young European explorers. And so they would start a relationship. They would get married, and they would, of course, produce children. And so the children then would be of blended ancestry. They're part European. They're also part Native American. They're mestizo. And in most countries in Latin America today, the majority of the population are mestizos. So the mestizos of, say, Mexico or Argentina or Venezuela, this is an example of a legacy of the European exploration and conquest of North America. All right, the next rung down the ladder would be a group known as the mulattoes. And the mulattoes would be the result of a marriage or relationship between a European and an African person. Now, the African person might be a slave, they might be a former slave, whatever. The point is they're having children, and that person is of mixed ancestry. So they're part white, part black. And you can see where they fit on the ladder. They're not at the bottom, but they're definitely not at the top. So the mulattoes would not have had a lot of political power in the North American colonies. At the very bottom would have been Africans and Native Americans. And because they're enslaved, they would have had virtually no rights or privileges in these colonies. So that's a quick look at the caste system. Again, our guiding question is, what role did that system play in Spanish colonies? And I think it's pretty obvious. What it's going to do is it's going to kind of designate where you fit in society. And that's because it's often tied to your ancestry, your blood. It's not something that can change. I mean, you can't become a Peninsulare if you're a mulatto, right? You can't jump from mestizo status to Creole status. It just doesn't work that way. It's all about where you were born and who you were born from. So it's a pretty rigid system. All right, that is all for this particular topic.